Welcome back to the Beaver Banter podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner, my co-host Ian Rivers, and Ian, things kind of slowly moving into that end of the calendar year phase. We just really have basketball and hockey to talk about. We'll get into that in a second, but first of all, how you been? How are we doing here?
I've been better. I've been worse. There's a lot of things going well, but this might be like the lowest point of my Chargers fandom of 16 years. I mean, honestly, and you know what? We're not going to get too far into that, but that's the main negative. And I guess if that's the main negative in my life right now, that's not ultimately that bad.
Relying on an NDSU quarterback in the NFL.
Easton Stick, baby. We talked about it like briefly before the show started, where it's like Easton's been on the team now for quite a while, and I'm excited for him to get his shot, but I also don't want him to I want him to succeed, but the defense to revert back to terrible so that he can still get his moment, but the team still loses so that we still get a great pick. But
all credit to him. I hope he plays great, but also I hope if he doesn't do great, that's all right. Easton Stick is my wife's favorite football player because she was at NDSU at the same time. So it's okay. We're okay.
He quoted saying, "I know NDSU is not the same as the NFL, but I'm pretty accustomed to winning," I think was his quote.
Well, then I don't know what he calls this year for the Chargers.
No, not good is what he calls it.
Anyway, so let's dive into some basketball here. Bemidji State men's and women's were on the road over the weekend. They were in Moorhead and Aberdeen, which again, trying to configure the new travel partners and refigure out everything has been an interesting game, especially because now Moorhead is with Northern, and I believe that's a new configuration this year. And
I don't think so.
Has that always been the case?
Sure, last year that we did that, because I was going to make a comment about, of course, last year I feel like we struggled on that road trip as well.
It's because I was going to say this has to be a tough road trip.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I know for sure last year we went and MSU, Moorhead, and Northern State were the combo weekend that weekend.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. Yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, because you got to go to Moorhead and then you got to go all the way to Aberdeen. And that's it's a Friday night. Those games are later. The games on Saturday are earlier so you can get home. But it's not a fun bus ride because you're leaving right after the game and you're heading down there to your hotel to get any kind of sleep and then waking up and trying to get there for shoot around and get comfortable. And which is always why winning those Friday night games is so important. And it's so important for a home team to win your Saturday night game because you just know that you have a team that's on the second night in the NBA terms. They're on the second night of a back-to-back and you got to try and win those if you can. Bemidji State had a tough task playing a top 7, top 5 team in MSU Moorhead, consistently good, had a lead in the first half, couldn't quite hold on. But, you look at that game and then you think, you know what? They almost had a chance to upset a top 10 team in Division 2. Let's go. Let's go to Aberdeen and let's take on Northern. And things did not go well for the Bemidji State men's basketball team in Aberdeen. We'll get to that in a second. But first, Ian, let's talk a little bit about what happened to the Beavers in Moorhead. What did you kind of think of that game?
Well, like you said, I was a little bit optimistic after the game had ended because I said, you know what, they played pretty well. They did all they could, I think. They shot pretty well. The second half kind of got away from there at the end, but they played pretty well against a really tough opponent in MSU Moorhead. And yeah, like you said, then they kind of turned around and laid an egg on Saturday night. But in terms of, shooting, they shot the ball really well from three, especially, in that first night. Pretty well, 31%. That's, as long as you're over 30, I'm okay with that. And there wasn't a glaring issue. They had 12 turnovers, but that might be kind of the difference in the game. You only took the ball away 4 times and you turned it over 12 times. 12 is not like an egregious number of turnovers, but it's definitely something that you are going to want to get more than 4 defensively if you turn it over 12 times offensively. But Yeah, I think, rebounding is what helps them stay in this game. The rebounding battle was tight. Sutherland and Albrecht, those guys, like we talk about almost every week, those two guys are going to be the anchor for this team. And you're going to play through them, getting the ball down low, playing a little two-man game. That was kind of my specialty when I was in high school. Dish it into the post. You got to move, pass and move. That's what you do. You find an open spot on the three-point line. They kick it back out, and then you just got to hit your shot if they actually drop down and try to give the help in the double team. And so I think that is definitely something they're going to look for and look to attack as it goes forward. But, yeah, John Sutherland, I mean, he's been the big talking point so far. He's been absolutely phenomenal, and he added another double-double on Friday night.
Yeah, and also got his 1,000th career point.
Correct.
In that ball game as well, scoring 22
for Bemidji State, right? Or was it just his 1,000th career?
What
it must have been his 1,000th.
I think it's just going to go 1,000th career point.
That would be
it's
crazy.
At 1,000th career points at BSU. That's according to BSUBeavers.com.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess I don't know how many points.
Well, he only played one
season.
He only played once. Well, he's a senior now, and I think he played his freshman year at UMD and then transferred after that.
Okay.
So if you have a sophomore, junior, he played as a transfer sophomore, then as a junior, and now is in his, senior year this year. And I'm trying to, he had, I think a lot of it was scored last year. So he had 248 points in 2021-22. And then the next year, which was a year ago, had 572. And then you combine it with where he's at this point. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure. See, I was under the impression that last year was his first year on campus here at BSU. So that's where I was a little confused. I'm like, damn, that's a lot of points to be scoring. I know he was pretty good last year, but that was a lot of points that he put up. But yeah, either way, 1,000 career points on Friday. He reached that, correct? Yep. So congrats to him. He's been phenomenal, and he probably will continue to be phenomenal. He played 39 minutes in that game, getting only 1 minute of rest for one of the most important pieces on this team.
Yeah, exactly. And, you can't quite hang on against MSUM. I get it. They're undefeated. They're going to be towards the top of the conference this year. Those kind of games are going to happen. You're on the road. You played them as tough as you can. Some things didn't quite go your way at the end, but you're going to, live another day, and then you go to the Friday or you go to the Saturday game and things just fall apart on you. And you just kind of have that complete dud of a game. And, it's a long season. You're going to have some of those games. Northern's not a bad team either. But you just kind of wish that you would have been able to split on the weekend, especially considering how close you were to beating MSU Moorhead, or at least, in prime position to try and win that game. If you look, the Bemidji State lost 84-68 against Northern. Looking at that game, Ian, you could also just pin it to Northern just shooting lights out. How much did Northern shoot from the three, Ian? What was their percentage?
That would be 56%, 14 of 25. Yeah, I think combine that with the 21 turnovers from BSU and double digits, it seems a lot worse than it is. But, I mean, a lot of that was just shooting yourself in the foot in the first half. I remember you sent me a message and said, wow, I mean, this just got out to an ugly start. And then once you're down to a team like Northern State, who, yeah, they're 5-5 now on the year, but I feel like they were a pretty good team last season, and they've
been a historically they can play. They're no scrubs. You gotta beat them every time you play them.
Exactly. And so that makes it difficult when you put yourself in a 14-point hole at halftime because of all those turnovers. And, sometimes a team is just going to shoot lights out and there's nothing you can do about it. But, I mean, that's really all you can take away from this game. You didn't get out rebounded because, which is a little bit shocking. And part of the rebounding thing is like in a blowout, a lot of times the reason the rebounding looks so lopsided in a blowout game like that is because one of the teams just isn't missing shots. So you can't get a rebound because they don't miss a shot. But it was weird to see Bemidji State out rebounded Northern State by 5. and lost by 16. So that's an interesting thing. I think Bemidji State's going to be at least
And
even
also,
or
to be
winning.
fair, you don't need to get a rebound if you turn the ball over. If the other team doesn't get a shot.
That's also very true. The 21 turnovers do play a big part in that. Yeah. It just kind of made me remember. Did you see that North Dakota State basketball against Oak Hills
Oh
this
my
this weekend?
goodness. Why
There was,
so I was told NDSU
oh
scheduled
my,
them because Western Illinois like dumped on them, or like they had no game to play. So they needed to fill. And so they played Oak Hills. It's crazy how much Oak Hills is getting the national spotlight. I mean, they're getting clowned, so I'm sorry. But
yeah.
I knew people from my high school that went to Oak Hills Christian. Like it's just a little Bible college. Like what like for Bemidji State, this is a schedule win, but like you schedule them because like it's right down the road. Like nobody's got to travel. We can just get it done in a night and go. I mean, I'm sure NDSU wrote them a big check. So at the end of the
Oh
day,
yeah.
they're like, okay, well, everybody on the team's getting new travel. Like everybody on the team's getting an iPad or something for how much money they're getting. But it was like, what was the score? 108 to
I
7
think it
or
was
something.
108 to 14. I think it was a
Yeah.
96 or 94-point win for NDSU.
Yeah.
And
And
I
that
know
will
there was
count
some.
towards their NCAA tournament hopes.
Yeah, imagine they throw that up around the bracketology time in late February, and they're talking quality wins. It's a 96-point win over
I,
Oak Hills Christian College in Little Bemidji. But yeah, I know there was some Moorhead fans that were salty because Moorhead's got a pretty good basketball program, and Bemidji State's played against the Gophers in recent memory. I went to that game; it was just an exhibition, but some of the Moorhead fans were like, "Dude, we're like 20 minutes away, and you won't schedule us, but you'll schedule these clowns like to come out and get
right.
drummed by
Well,
you."
it's like why I think somebody asked Ben Johnson, head coach of the Gopher men's team for basketball, like, you ever gonna like the hockey series? They do one where they play St. Thomas. Are you guys thinking of doing that? And he's like, basically the nicest way of saying no, we're not doing that. You imagine if we lose that game, like we'll never
Yeah.
hear the end of it. And I feel
Well,
like
and
it's
I
the
think
same
that would
thing
be
with
kind of
Moorhead.
fun. I know that back in the day, um, it was football and hockey, and it was Notre Dame and Boston College that would play on the same weekend. They would do like Friday and Sunday for hockey, and then Saturday would be the football game that they would play against each other. And
Mhm.
obviously, we're not talking about Bemidji when we talk about St. Thomas and the Gophers, but I think that would be a fun weekend, for the people down in my area, at least, that can get to the cities for games like that, play a hockey series and the basketball series, maybe in the same weekend, or maybe not a
Right.
series for basketball, but just one game.
You have a double header, maybe of men's and women's on the Saturday, and then yeah, you space it out a little bit. You can make it work. You certainly could.
Right.
But they don't. Here's St. Thomas has every incentive to do that, and the Gophers have
Have
absolutely
none. Yep.
no incentive to do that. But yeah, I mean, Oak Hills. I saw that there was a Barstool video where classic a guy doesn't know how to say Bemidji and just butchers it 4 times.
Jack
It's
Mack.
like,
Yep.
guys, it's not that hard. How does Al Michaels be me G? Like, there's no, where's their ease in succession? What are we doing here? Like that, it's the watching the selection show for hockey and seeing that not only did they spell Bemidji wrong, but they get the wrong logo and the graphic uh,
Yikes.
on TV. Remember that a couple of years ago when they
Yep.
play Wisconsin? Yeah, it's like you got. So anyway, yeah, the Oak Hills claim to fame is going to be the nearly college equivalent of Bishop Sycamore. So, you
Right.
know,
Well, the
uh,
weirdest thing is like people talk about those games and they're like, "Well, no, it's cool for those guys. They got to play against a D1 opponent." It's like,
nothing about that game was fun for them.
I don't think that you think back and like talk to your kids about like, "Oh yeah, I got to play against a Division 1 team one time. Oh, how did it go, Dad?" Uh, I mean, we kept it close. It's a
Go to
competitive
your
game.
room.
Go to your room. Yeah. Don't ask any further questions.
Yeah.
But
He just
yeah,
sits back and like his eyes get to you. There's like a flashback and they just like have to stay like, hey, we got, yeah. So, anyway, Bemidji State, did not beat Oak Hills Christian College by that much, but still all right. So, I mean, overall, is the sweep the worst thing for BSU men's? I mean, not really. I mean, they still got some time. That's a tough weekend series. You're on the road for that. It's early. Now things kind of get a little interesting this week, Ian. The men's basketball team is going to host UMary Thursday night, 5:30 at the BSU Gymnasium. And then on Saturday, they're going to go down to St. Cloud State. Is this a chance for Bemidji State get 2 wins and kind of sweep on the weekend, and then they have a couple weeks off for finals?
Yeah, I think it is. UMary 1-4 in conference play, 5-5 overall, and St. Cloud State 2-3 in conference play, 5-4 overall. So I think it's a decent opportunity to rebound and get back on the right track. At the very least, you're going to want to split. And no, I don't think that getting swept by, certainly when one of the teams is MSU Moorhead.
Right.
Yeah, you want to pick up some wins every once and then against teams like that, but and you don't go into those games thinking, all right, we're going to lose and then we're going to focus on tomorrow's game. But you're not going to get super upset this early in the season. You're middle of the pack right now, and you're only 4 games into the conference season. So I don't think it's really affecting what your opinion of the team is too much at this point, but you don't want to string too many of those results back to back to back. So yeah, definitely want to get a rebound this weekend and hopefully win both of those games and then have, half of a month off, 2.5 weeks off over the holiday period where you can sit on those wins is what I would say.
Right, exactly. And again, even if the Bemidji State, let's say they split this week and it feels kind of underwhelming, things really don't ramp up until we get to the new year anyways. And it's these first few games and even conference games are like, okay, let's get our feet underneath us. Let's get into the season. Let's see who's got the hot hand. Here's some things we drew up all summer. Did it come to fruition? Okay, like what are the adjustments we have to make? Who's earned some more playing time? Who's earned maybe the right to not play a few minutes here and there? Interestingly enough, we talked about last week for the Beavers, Tate Olson was a sophomore who didn't play a ton last year, starting to get some minutes. I noticed Christian Pekarich, who is a freshman this year from Brainerd High School, got a little bit of time in that Northern game. So you can already see Boshi starting to mix in maybe a few of the young guys a little bit. Because again, it's to see what you have. And maybe that changes once we hit the new year and we kind of really start to feel where this team is going to be at. But you can already see some of the younger guys getting mixed in. So it'll just kind of be an interesting little wrinkle. But I think overall for Bemidji, if they want to have a good weekend, it's make your threes and don't turn the ball over, which sounds simple and probably is simple, but just having that happen in a game situation, you're facing 2 teams that are nowhere near the caliber of teams that you faced over the weekend. I think a sweep should be kind of expected, but also a split isn't the end of the world if, something weird happens in those couple games. But overall, I think Bemidji State's in a good position to bounce back and kind of erase the weekend that they had over the last one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this team, they had a tough weekend, and there was rougher stretches last year throughout the course of that season, and they still ended up with 20 wins when it was all said and done. So I don't think that this is necessarily time to hit the panic button early on this team as they kind of trudge towards, like you said, once that new year hits, start getting a ton more games under your belt, then you really start formulating opinions about where this team is at come mid-January, early February.
Yeah. Now, as we move over to the women's side, they, of course, played in those same environments as well. And Ian, it was not a great Friday night for the Beaver women.
Yeah, you lost the game by 23 to a winless MSU Moorhead opponent that has now won 2 games on the year. They must have beaten probably Crookston that came with, I would assume, Bemidji State on that road trip. So Bemidji State now falls to, after that, 0-3 in the conference and 2-4 overall with the 23-point loss. And, kind of what we talked about last week, where it's the same kind of thing. You had one quarter early on that was a 10-point deficit. And then you never really had that quarter that was able to climb you back into the game. And you start the third quarter with an 11-point deficit. So it's just not quite putting it all together quite yet for the BSU women's basketball team. And that kind of showed its ugly head against Moorhead on Friday night.
Yeah, things did not go their way. And like you said, when you end up losing to a team like that, things just never quite came together. And, if you look at MSUM from the field, they shot 41%. That's definitely going to help you on those situations. And we talk about it with the men's. We're going to apply it here to the women's. You got out rebounded by almost 20. I mean, it's a 49-32 ratio in there. MSUM just out rebounded you in the game, those second chance points. But overall, they shot 31.5% from the field, 26 from three. It's just one of those nights you want to forget. I think if you're Bemidji State and you try and move on, and like you said, that big quarter eluded them. It looked like, for half the game in the second and fourth quarters, BSU was able to hang with them. But it's just, MSU Moorhead started out quick. They got up 10 after the first quarter. And then coming out of halftime, MSUM had another, kind of 9-point swing in that third just to solidify their lead. And Bemidji State just didn't have enough time to catch up in that situation. But things kind of switched over and the shooting got a little better from the field, kind of stayed about the same from three. And the rebounding got better on Saturday night, but Northern's a good team. And like the men's, they created a lot of turnovers. BSU had 22 turnovers compared to NSU's 10. And Northern State's an 8-2 team. They're undefeated in the conference. And sometimes those things are going to happen with you. I thought Bemidji State did a good job playing with them early in that first quarter. And then, that second quarter happened and it's a 21-10 swing in the second quarter. And that's kind of really what was the nail in the coffin on that one.
Yeah, it was a lot better shooting night for the Beavs, and you just couldn't quite keep the ball. Like you said, 22 turnovers. It's the same deal with the men. That night was, I don't know if Northern State had kind of greased the ball up and they put some stickum on their own hands because that's 43 turnovers combined by the Beavers on that night between the men and the women's team. So that not an ideal way to win basketball games when you turn the ball over that much. It is very rare to win games when you have over 20 turnovers. But I think that was the main thing. They shot pretty well, all things considered. The shooting was not that good against MSU Moorhead. And that's kind of the main thing that tanked you pretty early on in that game. And yeah, they turned around and shot pretty well on Saturday night, but it's hard to defend when 18 fast break points, 54 points in the paint for Northern State compared to just 34 for BSU. So those 20 points were the difference in the game in a 20-point loss.
Yeah, and there were a couple positive spots for BSU in that Saturday night game. I mean, Alyssa Hill got 20 points. Sam Pagancic had 14. So there's a couple ladies who had a decent Saturday night. But after that, there was kind of a drop off in terms of the offensive production. You talk about the turnovers, and yeah, it's a weekend to forget. Things kind of flip around as now they will, like the men, host on Thursday night UMary, and then they're going to go to St. Cloud. Ian, kind of what are your expectations for Bemidji State through the week?
Well, it's going to be, another tough weekend. St. Cloud State 6-3, UMary 5-6. So maybe a little bit better than what the men's teams are looking at, or the men's team. And I guess both of these teams are in a pretty different spot. These programs on the men's and women's side, but. Yeah, I think you want to go into any game thinking you have the opportunity to win. I think that's about all you can do is just take it one game at a time and approach that game with the best mentality you can. If it ends up working out for you, that's awesome, and I think we knew from the start this year, a team that's picked 14th, we talked about with UT Permian Basin, they were picked to finish 7th in the football conference of the Lone Star, and they ended up winning it. I don't know if anybody was expecting that. But any chance you have to pick up some wins here early in the season are just going to help out later on in the season when you're trying to get 13th or 12th and just make that little bit of a jump up from last season, I think is what you're trying to do. And you know what? It's still early. So maybe just like the men, some of these, bigger losses, especially after – we had some closer games last weekend against Minot State and Crookston. Both of these games are on the road. Now you come back home against UMary. Maybe it's just, again, maybe we're overreacting a little bit. Two good teams, Northern State and then Moorhead. But
yeah.
So Maybe we're overreacting a little bit to early in the season here. I think you take it one weekend at a time and you try to get wins where you can.
And I think the most winnable game this weekend probably has to be UMary. I mean, they're averaging more points allowed than they score. They're UMary is more of an offensive minded team. They average about 67.5 points. They allow 68. So it's a team if Bemidji State kind of wants to get in a shootout, they're capable of doing. And if you're looking at St. Cloud State, I mean, they took Northern to overtime and lost, and then had a 9-point loss at MSU Moorhead as well for St. Cloud State women. So, I mean, I think when you look at it that way, and you're at, like you said, you're at home, you don't have to go on the road. I think that not that St. Cloud, in terms of where Bemidji State has to travel, is too terribly far, but also I think if you're looking at those games, UMary is probably the one that you have circled as like, okay, can we win this game? It's a Thursday night. Everybody's a little out of their element. So we're the home team that should play into our hands. You'd have to think that that helps out Bemidji State in that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being at home is one of the more comfortable things. And then it's one of the shorter road trips that you're going to have. St. Cloud and Duluth are probably pretty similar, other than, if you end up playing in Crookston later this season, which they do. But yeah, one of the shorter road trips you'll have all season to St. Cloud State. So hopefully there's some comfortability.
I was going to say, I think the next game for Bemidji State women is they don't have the break like the men do. I think they have a non-conference game thrown in there this coming Tuesday against Valley City. So, we'll probably have recorded a podcast once that game is already done. But Valley City State, that's a game that Bemidji State should win. I mean, you put it on the schedule to get an extra win on your resume. And so again, in this 3-game stretch, realistically, can you go 2-1? Can you kind of do that? Can you split in your conference games and win the non-conference game, or at the very least, just make sure you get that Valley City State game like you talked about, just trying to stack some wins, get some momentum, and then they take a break, and then they don't play until the new year when things pick back up on the 5th and 6th of January as well. So by the next time we talk, Ian, we won't have any basketball to really preview. It'll be kind of uncharted territory in that aspect.
Yeah, we'll be able to break it down, but then we'll have a couple weeks where we don't have anything going on for the basketball. So yeah, like you said, good to bring that up. The Valley City State game is next Tuesday at 5:30 in the BSU Gymnasium, because based off of our schedules right now, we've been usually recording Wednesday evening or Wednesday afternoon. So we probably won't have an episode out by the time that game is over, or even if it is, somehow the public probably won't have listened to it yet, most of them. Yeah, bring that up before that happens, and then prepare for the holidays.
All right, before we get into men and women's hockey, Ian, there is a football story that came across the desk here earlier today, and it's that senior offensive tackle Ty Cobb and redshirt sophomore defensive end Marcus Hansen were each named to the Associated Press All-America teams on Wednesday. Cobb was first team, while Hansen was second team. So a couple All-American honors for some Bemidji State football players. And of course, we had Marcus on the podcast. Great dude, great defender. Go back and listen to that podcast. We talked with him. He gave some great answers, but it's cool to see him and Ty Cobb get the respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they both deserve it. Marcus put up phenomenal numbers defensively, and
NSIC Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, NSIC Defensive Player of the Year. That's got to be good enough for something. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not 100% sure how to evaluate offensive linemen sometime, other than you don't
grind tape?
Did you put enough people on their backside? And I think that Ty did that quite a few times this year, protecting his quarterback. So congrats to both of them.
All right, let's move into women's hockey. So, Ian, they got a chance to try and get a win by going down to St. Thomas, kind of that winnable series. Friday night was not ideal. They lost 2-4, but they came back on Saturday and got a nice little 4-0 win to get that WCHA win under their belt.
Yeah, and I think that this in and of itself is a little bit of an improvement, at least in conference play compared to last year. Just because of what we talked about last year, you go into some of these series against Minnesota State and St. Thomas, which as of right now are kind of the teams that are on the same level as Bemidji State, at least on the women's side, that you want to try to take points away from. And, as it is a little bit frustrating that, you've split both weekends. They've seen them so far and haven't really taken the chance to leapfrog either of these teams. It still is good that you at least did split, because I think one of the 2 weekends last year, St. Thomas actually swept us.
Yeah, it was not a
So
good weekend.
yeah, good to get that 4-0 win. You're a little bit disheartened after a 2-4 game, but then you come back on Saturday night on the road and make a statement. Yeah, Kayla Santel and Taylor Nelson, the 2 goal scorers on Friday night in the loss. Haley Armstrong with an assist. And then on the 4-0 win, we had Shelby Breland, assisted by Riley Reeves. Taylor Nelson getting the second goal, assisted by Riley Reeves and Gabby Smith. Kate Johnson unassisted. Maya Hedrick with the final goal, assisted by Kayla Santel and Michaela Zilish, I believe is how you pronounce that. So pretty good weekend. Anytime the women's hockey team is able to pick up a win, it's been a tough WCHA. That's pretty good. I'm going to get excited about that.
They get win number 2 in the conference. Remember, they beat Mankato earlier in the season. Not only that, the 4-0 shutout win by Filipova earns the freshman goaltender WCHA goaltender of the week as she gets her first career shutout.
Let's go.
There we go. Some positive momentum there with women's hockey. I know it's been a grind. I know that they got a lot of young ones on the ice and trying to restock some things that they have going on in that program. But it's good for Filipova. She stopped the second most shots she's ever faced in her career, 6 shy of tying a career high, including stopping all 18 shots in the third period. And, obviously it's a team in St. Thomas. You should expect to try and win some of these games. But like you talked about last year, it's not a given. So the fact that they get that helps out a lot. And I mean, just when you're going down the list, I mean, there's a lot of sophomore, freshman, sophomore in this lineup for BSU. They're putting a lot of younger girls on the ice and just trying to get them that kind of sink or swim. And this was a good opportunity for them to kind of have some quality minutes to evaluate their players. It's hard to evaluate how good your team's doing when you're losing 2-9 and 1-9 to the Gophers, like it was a couple weeks ago. To have some of these at least gives you some adequate minutes to try and evaluate your players and evaluate where you're at. And so that's a good one. Bemidji State now can focus their attention. They have this weekend off. They have the Christmas weekend, the Christmas week off, and then New Year's weekend, Friday and Saturday. They're in Pittsburgh for the Battle at the Berg. They play Robert Morris, the Colonials, on Friday at 6:01 p.m. And then Saturday, they play either Colgate or Maine from the UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. I mean, getting away from the state of Minnesota, and they did
Just playing some
that.
different teams is the biggest thing.
Right. Yeah. That's what I think we talked about when it came to playing Wisconsin and Army, and not that Wisconsin was necessarily a uncommon foe for Bemidji State men's hockey, and especially because we do play them in the women's hockey spectrum as well. But always exciting to see different teams on the schedule and see if we can pick up some games and some points outside of the conference, keep that momentum rolling, and then carry it into the new year.
Yeah, exactly. And, my one question, where is UPMC? It's the University of Pennsylvania something.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's in Pittsburgh, I would have to say.
University, UPMC. What do we got here? What does that stand for?
University of Pittsburgh Mining College?
Medical Center? That can't be right.
Yeah, it's probably just the sponsor for the sports complex, to be honest with you. I don't know.
That could be true too, because I'm trying to think of where that's got to be it. But so it's in Pittsburgh, but it's not. It's at a sports complex because it's not. They're obviously not going to the what's the Penguins arena name? Is it like PPG Paints Arena still?
I think so.
Yeah. So they're I'm trying to see where this complex is, or to see like what campus it's officially on. And the Lemieux Sports Complex. So there's like Pittsburgh proper. It's like kind of north of there. looks like. I'm looking this all up on like Google Maps, by the way, for those of you who are listening. It's in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. Cranberry Township. It's a big deal, I guess, for people who are into that. Trying to see where technically it's just my Penguin. Is it maybe like the Penguins? Like, do they have like what the Gophers have? Because it looks like this is Penguins affiliated. Wonder if they have like what the not the Gophers. Wonder if they have what the Vikings have, where they have like the big facility. And they're like, yeah, we have like this rink that's capable of like hosting some games and whatever, like the Vikings do with the big stadium outside. And I wonder if that's the same thing.
Sure.
With
it could be
with that, because it looks like it's Pittsburgh Penguins affiliated. So if you're somebody who wants to go to Pittsburgh on New Year's Eve weekend,
well, I guess the main clue would have been like the name Lemieux. That could have given it away with Mario Lemieux, being a famous Pittsburgh Penguin. I hope that I'm not butchering that. For some reason, I feel like Mario is like his son. God, I hope I'm not getting that backwards, because
you're going to tick off our entire Penguins contingent of the podcast listenership.
Yes, we're very big in Pittsburgh. Very big podcast.
Very big.
With the Gunnar Olszewski, combination.
I love Gunnar. I don't think they love him there.
They might not. I don't know. I haven't asked any Pittsburgh fans. But...
I haven't asked any Pittsburgh. I follow a few Pittsburgh people on Twitter. I think they're probably fine now, but I think earlier in the season might not have been ideal.
Well, I don't know if they're fine, after losing to New England, but
they're never fine.
They're probably fine with him,
They're probably fine now. That's not what they're angry over. They'll pick something else to be angry about in 2 days. Right. Anyway, exactly. Men's hockey, Ian, they continue their season, and they played. It was a peaks and valleys. Peaks and valleys might be the best way to describe it. What was that non-conference series like in 2018 where they scored like 10 or 12 goals in a game? Like it was like a program record or something like that. Like it was just like, I remember not going to that game, and they scored like 8 or 9 goals. It was like, oh my gosh. And then the very next day I go to the game. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously knowing it's college hockey, knowing they can just flip on a dime. I'm like, well, I mean, they should win this one. And then they got shut out the next game. So I'm like, well, this is just, classic college hockey in a nutshell. But
I think I know what series you're referring to, because I think I was at both games.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what year it's in. I'm trying to look through 2017, 18, and maybe it was the year after, because I think it was it Merrimack?
It's got to be like 2018.
Yeah, I think it was Merrimack College that we played in Bemidji. We won 8-3 on Friday night, and then we went back because we were so excited. Fun fact, our roommate actually trolled us. He was like, no, you guys shouldn't go to that game. It's going to be awful. They're going to get stomped by this team from out east. And it was 5-0. I have a video of us laughing on Snapchat at our roommate who didn't come with us to the game, as it's 5-0 Beavers after one. And they won 8-3. And so we got super hyped, and we're like, all right, well, now we got to get tickets and come back the next night. And they lost 1-0, and there was just nothing. It was the most boring game ever. So yeah, that's kind of a good example of what this weekend kind of related to.
Yeah. And, the Bemidji State wins that first game. What was it? 7-1, and just straight up throttles Lake Superior State. And you're like, okay, perfect. They got that win. Obviously you're not expecting that next game to be that way, but you're like, at least you set the tone. Now go out and take care of business. And they did the exact opposite. It's like they completely ran out of gas. It's like a guy running a marathon. He runs it in the first like 2.5 miles, or like a 5K. You run it in the first like 2.5 miles. And then that final stretch, you just fall over. And that's kind of what it was like for men's hockey. Ian, what did you see over the weekend?
I saw the same thing I've seen for the last 2 months of watching Beaver hockey, if I'm honest. I mean, it was very frustrating, because it's, I think, the 4th time this season that you think that you're starting to turn a corner, like you're starting to get some sort of momentum. And maybe we shouldn't have thought that after the Minnesota State game. And I know we talked to Lucas after the Michigan Tech game, where it's like, yes, we did come back and win that game, but we also gave up 4 goals in that game. Like there was imperfections in it as well. And that's kind of the same thing with Minnesota State. And it's just been a season of ups and downs. You start the season off with a game against Wisconsin where you didn't know at the time how good Wisconsin was going to be. And then you get excited as they're like one of the better teams in the country. So it seems. Army's, you start off the season pretty poor, 1 win and it's in overtime against Army, who is not good by any stretch of the imagination. Then you go, wow, we just swept St. Thomas at home. We think we're getting some momentum, maybe we're starting to put it together here in conference play. You go to the UP, you get swept by Lake Superior State. It's awful. Then you come back home and the same thing happens and wow, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the spark we needed against Michigan Tech. And you come back out on Friday night against Minnesota State, you lose 5-1. But then Saturday night, you win 7-6, and it's one of the craziest games in Beaver hockey history that isn't maybe that Michigan Tech game where you come back in the third period and win that game on the road, finally start to think you're making some headway, come back, get swept by North Dakota, have a couple weeks off, and then you think, all right, that was the perfect reset we needed, 7-1. How can that be a fluke? How can that be a fluke against Lake Superior State? And you lose 6-1 on Saturday night against the same team. I am just so confused at how that can possibly happen. At how you can win a game 7-1 and then lose a game 6-1. I can understand if it's 3-1 either way against the same opponent at home. That's what you come back out with. And you know what? It's not like a super damning thing for the Beavers because everybody freaking splits in this conference. St. Thomas split with, I can't remember. Did they play Minnesota State this weekend? I believe they did.
I think they did, yeah.
Michigan Tech split with Northern Michigan. Bowling Green split with Ferris State, I believe. It's like everybody splits in this conference. And so while it's frustrating because you're thinking, all right, we won 7-1. These other games were close. If everybody continues to split and we can get lucky and pick up maybe Lake Superior State is starting to show their true colors and maybe they aren't that good. No, it's just, it's tiring, but it's, I think, a little bit less tiring than last year where we lost all those games in the last 2 minutes of it where you're like, oh, wow, we could be really good if we could just close out a hockey game, and didn't just play 58 minutes of it. But I think you just got to approach it kind of like women's basketball almost, where it's just every weekend, just go into it and every point is going to be valuable, and then you got to hope that come February, you're in a position where if you put 2 to 3 weekends in a row together, solid conference play, you got a stretch against Northern Michigan, Ferris State, St. Thomas, where, St. Thomas looks pretty good this year, but it's not like they're beating everybody. I mean, they're 7-5 in the WCHA or CCHA. So everybody splits. This is the conference records for each team: 7-5, 6-4, 5-4-1, 5-5, 5-5, 5-5, 5-6-1, and Ferris State down at the bottom at 3-7. So it's this is going to be one of the most nuts races you've ever seen for the McNaughton Cup, I'm sure.
Right.
And while it's frustrating that, we only got 3 points at home against Lake Superior State, who's currently in the bottom half of the conference standings, I just, it's frustrating, but you're still right there. And maybe, you go in with blind optimism again to the Bowling Green weekend here, and you just hope that things click, that you're hoping that this is the weekend that it clicks. And if it's not, you hope that it's the next weekend. And if that's not it, you just hope you get enough points along the way where you're at least in a position to get home ice come the playoffs. Because I think right now, with the way that this team's played, even though every other team in the conference is inconsistent, I still think that's kind of the ceiling for the Beavers, is maybe sneaking into the 3 spot or something like that, where you're kind of expecting this team to be somewhere between 3-6, maybe 3-7, depending on how this stretch now goes without Casper Magnuson and Eric Polke.
Yeah, it's crazy. Bemidji State is 4th currently in the CCHA with 16 points. They hold a 1-point lead over 5th, 6th, and 7th place Northern Michigan, Bowling Green, and Lake Superior State. Bemidji State, of course, playing Bowling Green over the week. Will be playing Bowling Green. They're going to host the Falcons here. Bowling Green is they had some issues there early in the season. It felt like things were kind of derailing, and then they've, at least for the most part, held their own in this conference. I mean, they had the controversy with the hazing. They had, one of their guys jump ship right before the season, one of their better guys. And they still, I mean, I know this year's weird, but they're still right in the thick of it with everybody else.
Yeah, they've been playing just as good as hockey as almost anybody in the conference right now. And it's one of the things about it is every weekend is going to be a big weekend in the CCHA because of how close these, I mean, second and seventh place are separated by 4 points. That means that in one weekend, you could go from seventh place up to second, which you probably couldn't because of everybody else that would steal points in there. But like hypothetically, if you were the only team that played a conference game that weekend and you swept, you could go from seventh up to second. And that's, I think, just nuts to think about right now at this point in the season. I'm sure, going down the stretch, when we get to February, it probably will not be that close, but it'll be a matter of, okay, there's going to be close races in this conference, whether it's the race for home ice or whether it's the race for the actual McNaughton Cup or whether it's, 3 or 4 teams fighting for the 2 seed so that they can host a second round game, that sort of thing. There's going to be close races in this conference. And so, like I said last week, yeah, it's early in the season, but every point you pick up now is just going to be more beneficial later on in the season when now you don't necessarily have to be the team like last year where Bemidji State was kind of chasing that pack later on in the season and then, couldn't end up making up ground, ended up finishing as the 6th seed. If you give yourself that buffer early, it makes it easier on you later. And I think that's what we've seen. It's going to be interesting. We're getting closer to that dreaded New Year's switch where the Beavers have kind of played a little poorly, to say it nicely, in the second half of the season lately. So we'll see. I guess we'll address that when we get to that bridge. But yeah, it's going to be quite an interesting ride. And of course, be aware this Bowling Green series is same as last Christmas break. Going into last Christmas break, a Thursday Friday series. Last year it was in Mankato, and it went really well. We took 5 of 6 points from Mankato in that series, winning both games on the road. So hopefully we can replicate some of that magic at home.
Any kind of updates? Have we seen anything yet on some guys' injuries, or are we still just kind of in the dark?
We did. For whatever reason, my internet does not like flow hockey at all. Almost everything else it is fine with. I'm podcasting right now using my internet. I watch the NFL using my internet. I watch the Wolves using my internet. I play video games using my internet, and the video games are spotty, but everything else works just fine. But with flow
It's a
hockey,
likely story. You're just lagging.
it's a likely story. But with flow hockey, I'd end up watching on 270p and with like constant buffering. And so it's very frustrating. And I've got to figure that out because it makes a 1-6 loss on Saturday night even worse when I'm like constantly refreshing my browser just to
Like
find out
refresh. We're down another goal.
Yeah. Yeah, no. But yes, some of the injuries were updated in the last game, and I believe some of those have been posted somewhere, but I can't remember where. We could probably find them and maybe post an update on Twitter or something like that. But Scholl, I think his timeline was pushed back a little bit, which is of course terrific. And you know what? I don't even think that Scholl, like, is Scholl going to be beneficial when he comes back? Absolutely. But if you're putting this entire like defensive struggle on Gavin Enright, I think that there's definitely some more defense,
Right.
like defensemen and offensemen that aren't playing good enough defense in front of him that are to blame as well. But Scholl's timeline got pushed back. Judding's timeline was like a month, maybe, or a little bit more than a month. Like not as long as I was maybe expecting. But of course, Scholl was supposed to be back already, and he is not. So we'll see how that ends up going for the Beavers. But Yeah, nothing. And until I see their names on the line sheet that get, posted a couple hours before puck drop, I'm not going to be too confident in anybody coming back until I actually see them on the ice.
Right. One last thing to mention for Bemidji State men's hockey is that fifth year senior Carter Jones was tabbed the Central Collegiate Hockey Association Forward of the Week. He led the Beavers with 3 goals in the split against Lake State and added an assist to tie for the team lead with 4 points over the weekend. It's his first time in 5 seasons that he has been honored with the weekly award. So, hey, there you go. There's some positivity to try and end things here today on the podcast.
Yeah, good for Carter. He had a great weekend. He's been one of the guys that I've been hoping would be able to step up more. He's gotten the occasional goal here and there, but yeah, he had a really phenomenal weekend. He was a big part in that win on Friday night, and he, of course, scored the lone goal on Saturday night. So I'll go ahead and give him credit for a hat trick. And of course, he just had an interview on the CCHA show. So if you're not following Mr. Perry Lascaris and the CCHA show, and you want to hear Carter's interview with him, go ahead and listen to the CCHA show. We are not sponsored, just giving my boy Carter a shout out. And I don't know. It'll be interesting. We've got a lot of sports this weekend, and then we don't have a lot.
Kind of cool up. Yeah.
Yes, things kind of cool off for I think everybody. I think women's hockey has a bye week.
Women's hockey, women and men's are off, and then women's are the only ones who are going to be playing. Yeah, in Pittsburgh. Yeah. But outside of that, men's and women's basketball, men's hockey, they're all off until that 5th and 6th.
St. Cloud State 4th. Series for men's hockey will be over the New Year's kind of Friday and Sunday series in St. Cloud. So we'll touch more on that when we get there. But yeah. Man, I mean, hey, I was a little bit worried. I'm like, man, Thursday night hockey game, the Chargers play the Raiders. What am I going to be watching? And then Justin Herbert gets shut down for the year. We get embarrassed by the Broncos in front of Antonio Gates and Phillip Rivers. And it's like, you know what? Maybe I will go ahead and turn that hockey game on. So Thursday, Friday series at the Sanford Center. Attendance. I don't even know how mad I can be about the attendance. The product on the ice has not been ideal, but even so, the attendance has still not been the best. So get out there, celebrate your holidays with a Beaver sweep of Bowling Green.
You can do whatever it is you need to do after the games.
Yeah, go get your shopping done beforehand. Go buy a ticket. It's fun. It's fun to go to games because it's like a mystery box. You never know what you're going to get. You might get a 7-1 win. You might get a historic comeback, or you might get one of the most embarrassing performances you've ever seen.
You might get a 7-1 loss. It's all baked into the cake. You never know which one you're going to get. It's like Russian roulette.
It's like the Bears trade for Khalil Mack. The Raiders mindset's like, this is Khalil Mack, but this first round pick could be another Khalil Mack. That's what you're getting with Bemidji State hockey.
It's the Bears, another Bears trade. The Panthers trading DJ Moore instead of just another first round pick. At least we saved the first round pick. Now we can draft another wide receiver. Heck, maybe he'll be as good as DJ Moore.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Dang it, I hate the Panthers.
Shocking. Oh. Carolina. Oh, hey. I could be a Panthers fan. Let's just keep it at that.
Why is that?
Well, I'm just saying it could be worse. I mean, the Panthers probably have one of the most bleak futures. They are the worst team in football, and because their owner
seems like a nutcase.
They don't own the number 1 overall pick because they traded it to Chicago. Oh my god!
It's we need to trade up for all these. We need to trade up for this specific draft pick because after all, we need Bryce Young, not any of these other picks that could also just be an equally good quarterback, but. Yeah, well, I think the owner of the Panthers, because he was a Pittsburgh Steelers guy. Sorry, Pittsburgh, you're getting another jab thrown at you in this episode today. He was like a minority owner of the Steelers, so he's like he wants to turn it into Pittsburgh, and the guy is like the ego of an owner, but like none of the actual like good qualities of an owner, which is like actually one allegedly. There was a play Pittsburgh ran, and he gave it to Frank Reich, like run this play next week. Or was like his footwork is wrong. Like the owner is like trying to coach the quarterback that's struggling that you've given no resources to. But you and the owner. Anyway, it's a fun situation. So it could be worse. You could have Spanos.
Yeah, you could have Spanos. That's a whole nother. We could record an entire podcast episode talking about Dean Spanos and Mr. John Spanos. It's always good when your owner has the same last name as the president of football operations. That
Yeah,
you
no, I heard
know
it's
that,
great.
yeah, you know that that's a qualified hire. Absolutely, it's always just great. But yeah, hey, we're gonna figure it out. We're gonna get rid of Staley, and Brian Flores is not going to be in Minnesota for much longer. So count your days, buddy.
That's you know what? I'll wait for things to play out. Let's put it that way. All
Fair
right,
enough.
this has been the Beaver Banter podcast. We're going to be back here next week talking a little more Bemidji State as things wind down for the calendar year. We'll see you guys next week. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as following our feeds on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook.